Here.
Right on.
Thank you. A couple of housekeeping things. Does anybody know the password to the Wi-Fi? Okay, never mind. I've got one thing that I was going to do here with the computer.
It's 2584, POLKHIST 2584 and an ampersand.
Gosh, you're not going to have anybody jumping in, maybe. Well, anyway, we'll see how that works later. Second, when they started talking about the fire thing, I look back, we really are kind of tight in here, but I found there's this window right here, and Trey Kelly's the tallest man in the room, so I think we'll be okay. So we'll be fine. Oh, okay, great. And when am I supposed to stop talking?
When you finish.
Well, because I mean, really, is there? Do y'all have a typical 8 o'clock, 8:15, 8:30, 9 o'clock? Okay, if y'all are fine, I'm fine, because I kind of rewrote this thing. I used to have a preacher who'd come in sometimes on Sunday morning, and he'd be a little disheveled, and he said, you know, the Holy Spirit just changed my sermon last night, and I had to rewrite the whole thing. Well, I came over this morning and spent some time at the soon-to-be Coke Museum, and then dropped by Parker and Lundy for what I thought was going to be an hour that turned out to be 3, and so I walked out of there at 6, and realizing, you know, when I saw Bill and Trey in ties, I thought, you know, my daddy would have worn a tie to this tonight. And I ran up to Bruce's, but he had already had the door locked and the lights off, so you got casual me. But this is a little more personal than I expected it to be, and I hope that's okay. But anyway, this is where we're going. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I started writing, because I didn't plan to do this. I went off to Auburn to be a dentist, and when I got there, I had to write a term paper my freshman year, and I decided to write a term paper about Bart Starr, and he was coaching the Green Bay Packers then. Y'all remember him? He was quarterback of the Packers, and he was my boyhood hero. I had a poster of Bart Starr over my bed, and he was just such a fine person and a great player, and so I thought I can write a term paper about Bart Starr, and I could even call him up and interview him. And so I called up Green Bay and got his personal secretary, and she said, well, Coach Starr isn't available, probably won't be available, and you probably aren't going to have a chance to talk to him. But his parents live in Montgomery, just 50 miles down the road, and here's their number, and why don't you give them a call? So I called up Bart Starr's parents and got his mother on the phone, and she said, well, why don't you just come on over here and spend some time with us? So I drove over to Montgomery and had the evening with he was, I guess, a staff sergeant and Mrs. Starr, and it just sort of changed everything. I realized, and this is, you know, this is how shallow this whole thing is. I love that access. I mean, I realized I was talking to Bart Starr's parents, and I could do this. I could write for the school paper and have access to all sorts of things. And so I did that, and I wrote for the paper, and I ended up writing, a lot of personal stuff for the paper, but some of the things that you do along the way, and some of the opportunities that it gives you a chance to write about your family. It gives you a chance to write about interesting people. I wrote a column about my grandfather my senior year, and my grandfather was Lee Parker, and probably a few of y'all might have known my granddaddy. He worked at the Liberty Bank for years, and I'll come back to another little story about him in a bit. But my senior year, I wrote a column about my granddad, saying things that, you can say things in a column in a newspaper. This is weird. You can say things in a newspaper at Auburn, 18,000 people who would read it, that you would never say to somebody face to face. And so I wrote things about my granddad, that he was really special to me. And so I wrote this, and it came out on Thursday, and he got the paper. My grandparents or my granddad subscribed to the Plainsman, the school paper, and so I knew it'd be getting to his house, and so I wrote it on Thursday, and he died on Saturday. Oh. And so he never read that column. But so I wrote so we came, we were all here, of course, for the funeral, and several of us, the cousins, several of us slept, stayed in their house, because I don't know if we really needed to, but people say when the house is empty, somebody might get in, so several of us slept in there. And so just listen to his clock tick. He had this small, like a tiny, I forget what you'd call it, but it, like a grandfather clock is what it sounded like, but small. And just listened to that all night long, and wrote another column the next week about what had happened and about how special I was. And then when I came home sometime later, it might have been even after I graduated, I walked in my dad's office, and he had framed those two columns and put them on the back wall of the office, and it just it helped you understand, helped me understand, as a 21, 22-year-old kid, what a father having his son, and what my dad having me write about his father meant, and how important these family stories are, and we let so many of them get away. I mean, every one of you is thinking of somebody right now that I wish I'd asked him something. I wish I'd asked her this. Wonder how this happened. Why this? And so we have an opportunity to do that now. I was at a deal at the Atlanta History Center last week. They had the Lee brothers in, and the Lee brothers are these. They're on the Food Network. They do a lot of cooking stuff, but they do a lot of writing too. They're sort of like food anthropologists, but they also. But they were there speaking, and something they said really struck me. They said, it's the last call for the oral history of the 20th century. We're at a point now where every one of us knew somebody who could tell us about the 19th century in our lifetime, and every one of them is dead. Well, we're at the point now where there aren't many people alive who can talk about the 40s, 50s with really strong memories. And we're losing them all. We're losing we talk about the World War II veterans, and of course there's that and what they experienced, and there are a lot of wonderful programs capturing. But what about Main Street, Cedartown in 1948? There are just the day-to-day stories that are so really easy to capture. The technology, used to. When I started writing books, I used a little micro cassette recorder. And then I'd have to transcribe that, and then I went to a digital recorder, and now you got the digital recorder that does with the USB, and I can plug it into my computer and send it to. There's a website called rev.com and rev.com, and for $1 a minute, and this is $1 a minute of transcription, which would cost me, it would take me a lot more than a minute to transcribe a minute. For $1 a minute, they transcribe all of my interviews. And then now it's gotten so easy that if you have a smartphone, you've got a recorder here. So you've got no excuse. You don't have to go out and buy this. If you've got a smartphone, you've got a recorder right here. And all you have to do is turn it on and plug it in, and, put it in front of somebody and start talking. And when you do that, you've captured your stories. You ask families stories, and because they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone if we don't do that. So here's what, give you just a little bit of background on how I did this, whatever this is. I've been writing books for about 21 years now. Mostly, books that nobody would ever, not nobody, obviously somebody has heard of them, but very small audiences. And I started thinking about it in about 1991, and I had a friend who was our preacher at Northside Methodist Church in Atlanta. He was a great storyteller. I had written for the newspaper in Atlanta, and then I'd been writing corporate newsletters for about 6 or 7 years, and I was writing about calcium carbonate and CPAP machines and your favorite getaway destinations for American Express, and we had a great list of clients, but it was all just business to business type stuff, and I missed writing the real stories. So I started working on this book with Bill, thinking that if I could get a book written and show people what I could do, I could write I might could get people to pay me to write a book. I couldn't say, Mr. Greer, I'd like to write your book, but I've never done one. Would you hire me? Well, of course he wouldn't. So I had to write one just to get it out there. So I put this together, and we started. I decided in early 1994 that this is what we were going to do, and so in March of '94, went to the two owners of the company I was working for, and I said, you know, I'm going to get out of here in 3 months. I'm gone. Said, I didn't tell them all the details, but basically, you know, Lexi and I had been married for, let's see, from '86 to '94, 7 years at that point. Didn't have kids. The doctor said, you're not going to have kids. The doctors never say you're not going to have kids. The doctors say, we can get you pregnant. But, you know, so we're done with it. So Lexi and I said, okay, we're not going to have kids. We don't have to worry about this. Let's just do what we want to do. I said, I want to write books. She said, okay. And so we did that. I quit my job. And 2 weeks later, she said, I'm pregnant. I said, okay. We have burned the boats. There's no going back. So we went forward, and we finished up the book and got it printed, and it was a real fun time. We set a date for our sort of a big launch for the book. Bill, the person I'd written about, was going to come back. He had retired by then. He was coming back to Northside. He was really popular. We knew we'd sell a lot of books, but we also knew we'd really get the word out to the right kind of people who might be able to, you know, to do a book like this. And so we set September 25th is on a Sunday for the big launch, and there at the church, and him to sign. And on Tuesday before Sunday, my grandmother called and said, your dad has had a heart attack. And so we thought, well, what were we going to do? Well, we had to go forward with it. I mean, this was, you know, we had to bring Bill back. This had been planned for months. And so we grabbed up all of Uncle Fred's roses that he had, you know, filled the Methodist church with for Daddy's funeral, and all the other flowers, and took him back to Atlanta, because the funeral was on Thursday, kept them fresh until Sunday, and just filled the hall with the flowers and Daddy's presents, and launched our book and our company, and started writing books. And so, you know, these are, for the last 21 years, I've really helped people. It's not exactly right an oral history. You know, an oral history looks like this, and this is a book that I did for two women down in Glenn County, and this is an unbelievable resource. And I'll leave this to y'all. I don't know if anybody cares about Glenn County history, but this is memories from the marshes of Glenn in World War II, and so what these two women did, they interviewed about 250 people in Glenn County to talk about their memories from the war. And so they had shipyards there in Brunswick. I believe 3 shipyards. They were building 52 ships a year and launching the Liberty ships from Brunswick. So they had all these shipyards running. They were running 24 hours a day. You know, Brunswick has, at that time, it might have had 10,000 people. During the war, it had 75,000 people. So there are wonderful stories about families who hot-bedded shift workers. You know, you sleep for 8 hours and then go to work, and somebody else would sleep for 8 hours and go to work, and somebody, you know, so you had just shifts of people sleeping at your house and feeding them and all, and the stories from the naval base out on St. Simon's, and the Blint base, and all of these people were, you know, so they just went around and recorded all these stories and just wrote them. It's not a narrative. What I typically do is I take those recordings and try to craft a narrative, which is very different from an oral history. This is just strictly what they said, and as a research, and the one thing that I wish we had done, we didn't index. I mean, it was just too massive. But it's spend some time with that if you're interested in World War II history. I think you'll enjoy that. But the difference between what that is and what I do, as I say, is I write a narrative. You know, I listen to people. I go with the recorder, sit down, transcribe it or have it transcribed, and then try to find the pieces that have a beginning and a middle and an end, and connect all of those dots. And there's so many dots. You know, I'm working on a story now. And I've told you all about this before. You know, I think the last time I was here, I talked to y'all about to the ones of y'all who were here last time. The others, but about Hoyt and Sue. You know, the murderers who came through town. And in doing that book, I've talked 15 years ago. I talked to a lot of people here in Cedartown, and that was a lot of fun. And just to talk about a few of the folks. And these are the things that you can learn when you're just talking to folks that let me see, like I talked to George Isbell, and you know, Mr. Isbell was president of the bank for years, but he talked about and I went ostensibly to talk about the bank robbery that happened, you know, but in '58, I believe. But we talked a little bit about the background and then just general stuff. He said, you know, I graduated in June in '36, and I started working at the service station on weekends for Roy Adams. In July, I heard about an opening at the bank, so I talked to Mr. Fred. That'd be Mr. Fred Brewster, of course. Not of course. For some of us, that's of course. He said, I didn't know if they needed anybody or if they could afford anybody, but I could come stand around and see if I might like it. I didn't have anything else to do, so on August 1st, 1936, I went up there and started standing around. Didn't have anything else to do, so I just kept going back. I'd been paid $10 a week at the service station, so Saturday came and I thought I might get $10. But nobody said anything about getting paid, so I said, well, maybe I'm working for the experience. That was common in those days. Or maybe they'll pay twice a month. The 15th came around and nobody said anything about getting paid, so I thought, well, I guess I'm getting a lot of experience. But at the end of the month, they gave me $40, and that established my salary. It was a little less than the service station on an annual basis, but you know, he said he was the fourth man in. George Boston was first, and then Fred Brewster, and then my grandfather, Lee Parker, he was the fifth person, and then Margaret Weatherly, and then Mr. Isbell. Well, those are just little things that sort of don't mean anything, but that's sort of the glue that holds all of this place together. I talked to, I talked to Harold Murphy. He's the federal judge up in Rome now, but he's my dad's age, and he grew up in Felton. But he says, I knew Lee Parker at the bank, and my father bought insurance from him, and he said he got liability, the things people remember. He said, I was going through some paper that you find if you start digging, and I guess maybe some people are hoarders too, but I was going through papers at my parents, and I found that they had insurance with $5,000 and $10,000 limits, and they had a $30 premium. And he found savings account stuff, but he said, but this is what was interesting to me. At 14 years old, he says Cedartown was where you went to do your grocery shopping when you lived in Felton. He said, I went to high school in Buchanan, but I went to grammar school at Benedict. I went to Benedict because Haralson County Schools didn't have any money. They had planned to have 7 months of school, but they ran out of money after 5 months. So my parents took my brother and me to the county line, and we rode a bus to Benedict, and then the bus would drop us off at the line after school, and we'd walk home, and their parents paid tuition to Polk County to let them do that. Well, you think about the importance of that. He's a federal court judge. And so, these are, again, just the little stories. I called up Odell Owens. Mr. Owens and I we sort of made a connection in high school, and he was in Atlanta for some reason. I live in Decatur, and I said, Mr. Owens, I'd like to talk to you about, I grew up in a time that was, we integrated schools when I was in 6th grade. Well, complete integration in 6th grade. It started when I was in 2nd grade. But come talk to me a little about, and for whatever reason, this is just one little piece that we got to talking about Mark Cornelius, and because Mark Cornelius had had a grocery store down there close to where, and Mr. Owens traded with him. And he said, Cornelius was a very instrumental person for black and white Cedartown community. He had a heart as big as all outdoors. He was crude. He loved to fight. Whether you were black or white, he'd fight you in a minute, and he wouldn't let anybody help you. He said, but he also said several times I'd go in and say, Cornelius, I don't have all your money, because you ran a tab everywhere. He said, don't worry about it. Don't pay anything this month. You can catch up later. He said, you're friends. He was friends as long as he played straight with him. And he said he was telling a joke one day. Cornelius was, and Mr. Owens said, I've always been blunt. And he was telling a joke in the store, and he started to use the N-word. And I said, hold it just a minute. You know very well I don't appreciate that. And he said, Odell, I'm so sorry. Forgive me. I'm sorry. I don't mean it. Sometimes I don't mean anything negative, just to show you. You come to my house tomorrow and have dinner with me and sit down at my table. And Mr. Owens said, no, that's not necessary. But it was just sort of, finding your way. And he came in, I think he said he came in 52. We got talking about S.Q. Rogers, and this is why I found this, because I know y'all were talking with Julia Trewick last night about Mr. Rogers, and this is how I ended up with Odell Owens' stories for tonight. And I thought this was really interesting. He said they had and Olin Bates tells sort of the same story here. But he said S.Q. Rogers had a football team going really good when I came here in 1952. He said the whites came out of enjoyment for our games with a different